The hum of the server rack was my morning anthem, a low, steady thrum that vibrated through the floorboards of the archive, a comforting presence. 7:15 a.m. precisely. My internal clock rarely deviated. The scent of ozone and chilled air, perpetually circulated by the industrial-grade cooling units, was as familiar to me as the taste of my meticulously brewed black coffee. I was UserHX, and my domain was order, a vast, sprawling digital wilderness tamed into pristine, indexed coherence. Every byte had its place, every file its checksum, every server its designated function. My life, too, mirrored this precision. I had arrived at 6:30, as always, before the first cleaning crew member would even think of unlocking the main entrance. The solitude was vital. It allowed me to prepare, to calibrate my mind for the day's meticulous tasks. My workstation, a fortress of 4 monitors, glowed in the pre-dawn gloom, each screen a portal to a different facet of the archive. Today's agenda: a deep scan integrity check on the historical documents pre-digital era repository, a sector known for its brittle metadata and convoluted file structures. A challenge, but one I relished. My workspace was a testament to my dedication. No stray papers, no forgotten mugs. My keyboard was a pristine black slab, each key wiped down nightly. My mouse, an ergonomic marvel, glided across a dark, unmarked pad. This wasn't just a job, it was a calling. To preserve, to organize, to prevent the decay of information. In a world increasingly fragmented and chaotic, I was an anchor, a guardian of digital permanence. Sometimes on my walk home, I would pass the old closed ice skating rink. Its corrugated metal shell, once a vibrant hub of synchronized motion and polished ice, now sagged, a monument to entropy. The windows were boarded, the entrance chained. Even in its decay, I found a strange, almost melancholic beauty in its stark lines, its former purpose still echoing in the rigid geometry of its structure. It was a physical representation of the very chaos I fought in the digital realm, the slow, inevitable creep of disarray. But I never lingered. My own world, my own systems, demanded my full attention. Today, the routine began perfectly. I logged into the primary archive interface. The dashboard, a kaleidoscope of green and blue, confirmed all systems nominal. No alerts, no warnings. The integrity check initiated, a cascade of progress bars filling across one of my screens, each one a promise of validated data. I leaned back, a sip of coffee cooling my tongue, and allowed myself a moment of quiet satisfaction. This was my piece. Then a flicker, not on the main dashboard, but on a secondary monitor displaying a live directory tree of the pre-digital era repository. A folder labeled Anomaly Logs materialized. My breath hitched. I hadn't created it. No automated script I knew of would generate a top-level directory in that specific repository. My fingers hovered over the keyboard. I double-checked my access logs. No external logins, no internal modifications by any other archivist. I was the sole administrator with right permissions for this sector. A quick scan of the system integrity log showed nothing. It was as if the folder had simply popped into existence, fully formed. A shiver, cool and sharp, traced its way up my spine. This wasn't a system error, it was too precise. My analytical mind immediately sought an explanation, a rogue script, a delayed command. I ran a full system diagnostic on the directory. The results came back instantly. Valid folder 0 bytes, last modified time. Now. I clicked the anomaly logs folder. It was empty. Of course it was, a ghost folder. I prepared to delete it, my fingers already moving to the command line. But then as I watched, a file appeared within it. Process 0001, log 0 bytes. Then with a visual stutter that made my eyes ache, the file size jumped to 1 KB. Then 5 KB. Then 12 KB. It wasn't being downloaded, it was being written. The timestamp, updating in real time, confirmed it. I leaned closer, my coffee forgotten. My fingers, usually so steady, trembled slightly as I navigated to open the file. The text editor loaded, displaying raw data. My eyes scanned the lines, expecting gibberish, expecting a corrupted header. Instead, I found patterns. Not legible words, not code, but a sequence of characters that repeated, shifted, and evolved. It looked like a fragmented sequence of hex code, but with an internal logic that defied standard corruption. There were blocks of 0x7A, 0x6F, 0x76, followed by a string of seemingly random 0xFF values. Then another block, slightly altered, 0x7A, 0x6F, 0x76, 0x01. It was like a language, but one I couldn't parse, a digital fingerprint of something utterly alien. As I watched, the text scrolled, new lines appearing at the bottom of the editor window, each one expanding the file. It was still writing itself. The patterns grew more complex, the sequences longer, the variations more pronounced. It wasn't random. It was structured. My meticulous world, built on predictable algorithms and logical progression, had just coughed up something that defied every rule. This wasn't just a glitch. This was an impossible equation, a self-generating enigma. What kind of corruption wrote itself? And what was it trying to say? The scent of ozone and chilled air perpetually circulated by the industrial-grade cooling units usually sharpened my focus. But this morning it felt thin. A phantom scent of something else, something metallic and cold, seemed to overlay it. I settled into my chair, the ergonomic curve a familiar embrace, and pulled up the diagnostic logs. My initial hypothesis, a cascading hardware failure, perhaps a subtle electromagnetic interference. Logic, order, these were my tools. The corrupted files from yesterday were still there, a digital stain on my pristine datasets. I isolated them, ran checksums, cross-referenced metadata, the usual protocols, but the errors weren't typical, not random bit flips, not sector damage. The anomalies were too structured. A sequence of garbled characters in a historical document database mirrored a pixel distortion pattern I'd found in an unrelated archive of geological survey images. A timestamp anomaly, indicating a file creation date centuries in the future, recurred across 3 separate datasets, one a collection of antique cartography, another a sound library of urban ambient noise, and the third, bafflingly, a repository of early 20th century botanical illustrations. It was like finding the same unique fingerprint on a teacup, a brick, and a leaf. I started seeing patterns where there shouldn't be any. The numerical value of a corrupted file size, for instance, would align with the number of characters in a particularly distorted phrase within another file, separated by gigabytes of unrelated data. These weren't random statistical anomalies. They felt deliberate, like a twisted signature. The archive's fluorescent lights, usually unwavering, began to flicker. Just a brief stutter, barely perceptible, a quick blink that left a phantom afterimage on my retina. I rubbed my eyes. Stress, I told myself. Too many late nights chasing phantom data. The old building's wiring was probably finally giving out. I dismissed it, turning back to the glowing screens, my fingers flying across the keyboard, trying to dissect the digital monstrosity growing within my systems. Later that afternoon, I reached for my ceramic mug, the one with the chipped rim that fit my thumb perfectly. It wasn't there. I distinctly remembered leaving it by my monitor. I checked my desk, then the small kitchenette down the hall. Nothing. A minor inconvenience, a momentary frustration. I must have put it somewhere else, forgotten. Another sign of fatigue, I reasoned. My focus was too sharp on the digital. Perhaps my physical memory was suffering. I brewed a fresh cup in a spare mug, the anomaly still burning at the edge of my perception, a persistent itch I couldn't scratch. The patterns intensified. They weren't just self-referential anymore. They seemed to evolve. When I attempted to isolate a specific segment of corrupted code, a new, similar corruption would manifest in a completely different, previously unaffected dataset. It was as if my debugging efforts were feeding it, prompting it to adapt, to spread. This wasn't a static error. It was a dynamic, growing entity. I spent hours, then days, hunched over my console, oblivious to the passage of time. My colleagues, if they noticed my increasing isolation, kept their distance. I barely ate, barely slept. The outside world faded, replaced by the glowing labyrinth of data on my screens. The digital patterns were becoming too complex, too intricate, too sentient to ignore. They mocked my logical frameworks, defied every rule of data integrity I knew. One evening, desperate for a break from the suffocating glow of the monitors, I found myself driving aimlessly, the city lights blurring into streaks. My car, almost on its own accord, pulled into the deserted parking lot of the closed ice skating rink. Flickering light. My stomach tightened. I walked closer, pressing my face to the glass, fogging it with my breath. On the dusty surface of the ice, I saw them. Not literal patterns, not yet. But the cracks, the natural fissures in the old, neglected surface, seemed to form shapes that were disturbingly familiar. A series of parallel lines, then a jagged break, then a cluster of smaller, almost geometric imperfections. My mind, now hyper-attuned to the anomaly, mapped them onto the digital distortions I'd been studying. It was irrational, I knew, pure projection. I backed away from the glass, my breath coming in ragged gasps. Was it truly just the stress? Was I losing my grip? The line between the digital corruption and my physical reality felt impossibly thin, stretched to breaking point. I was obsessed, yes, but the alternative, ignoring what I was seeing, what I was feeling, felt like a surrender to something far more terrifying than madness. The scent of ozone and chilled air, perpetually circulated by the industrial-grade cooling systems, usually grounded me. But today, the hum seemed to waver, a faint, almost imperceptible stutter in its rhythm like a skipping record. I dismissed it, blaming a lack of sleep. I sat at my terminal, the glow of the screen illuminating the meticulously organized stacks of drives and cables. A small ceramic mug, a gift from a distant relative, sat to my left, filled with lukewarm coffee. I reached for it, my fingers brushing against the smooth, cool surface. But as my hand closed around it, the mug felt different. The ceramic seemed to ripple under my touch, the familiar texture momentarily softening, then hardening again with a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer. I pulled my hand back, staring at the mug. It was perfectly normal. My mind was playing tricks. A moment later, a sharp, metallic tang filled the air, overriding the ozone. It was like iron filings mixed with something acrid, something wrong. My coffee, I realized. Smelled of it? I brought the mug closer, sniffing cautiously. The coffee, usually robust and dark, now carried an unsettling chemical undertone. I pushed it away, a knot tightening in my stomach. Later, while reviewing a batch of archived geological survey data, a series of satellite images of a remote desert region, the screen flickered. Not a power surge flicker, but a subtle, almost organic ripple across the pixels. A small, jagged line of text at the bottom of the display, usually a timestamp, seemed to shift its characters, rearranging themselves into a meaningless scramble before snapping back into place. I blinked, rubbing my eyes. My determination, usually an unshakable fortress, felt a crack forming. I decided a break was necessary. My routine demanded it. Every Tuesday after the initial data uploads, I would walk to the old closed ice skating rink. It had been shut down for years, its windows boarded, its entrance chained. It was a place where order had once reigned, where lines were drawn and followed. As I approached the rink, the familiar faded paint of the entrance sign seemed to waver, the letters skate briefly morphing into something else, something illegible before settling back. I stopped, my breath catching. My heart hammered, but I forced myself to walk on, dismissing it as a trick of light, a reflection. I peered through a gap in the plywood covering a window. The ice, or what remained of it, was a dull, gray sheet cracked and pitted. But as I watched, a section near the far wall seemed to shimmer. Not a reflection of the sun, but an internal luminescence, a faint, sickly green glow that pulsed once, then vanished. Then a sound, a faint, high-pitched whine, like a rusty hinge, echoed through the empty space. It repeated, not fading, but looping back on itself, the exact same fraction of a second, 3 times. Whine, whine, whine. My hands clenched into fists. This was not normal. Back at the archive, I tried to document it. I recorded the screen flicker with my phone, captured the shifting text, even tried to record the strange metallic smell by simply describing it in an audio memo. I approached a colleague, a placid individual named UserHX, who was meticulously organizing a rack of older tape backups. UserHX, I began, my voice tighter than I intended. Have you noticed anything unusual today? The hum, the coffee, the displays. UserHX looked up, a faint frown on their face. Unusual? No, UserHX, everything's as it should be. The systems are running smoothly. I pulled out my phone. Look at this. I recorded it. The text, it shifted. I held the screen out, tapping the play button. The video played. The screen in the recording was perfectly stable. The timestamp was clear, legible, no flicker, no shift. I played it again. Nothing. My hand trembled. UserHX, my colleague asked, a hint of concern in their tone. Are you feeling all right? You look a bit pale. I tried the audio memo. And this smell, I insisted, it was like something corroding. I played the recording. My own voice, clear and precise, described the metallic tang. The strange, high-pitched whine from the rink, which I had sworn I'd captured, was absent. The metallic tang, which I had smelled just moments ago, had vanished, replaced by the familiar ozone. UserHX gave me a sympathetic, yet utterly dismissive look. Perhaps you've been working too many late shifts, UserHX. It's easy for the mind to play tricks in here with all this quiet. I retreated, my mind reeling. The evidence, solid moments before, had simply evaporated. It wasn't just that my colleague didn't believe me, it was that the proof itself had betrayed me. Had I imagined it all? The mug, the coffee, the shifting text, the rink, the looping whine. There was my meticulous mind, my fortress of order finally crumbling, the algorithmic anomaly. I had named it, believing it to be confined to the digital realm. But it was here now in the physical world, twisting not just data, but my very perception of reality. It was personal. It was no longer content to merely corrupt files. It was corrupting me. The previous day had left a residue, a fine, invisible dust of doubt clinging to every surface of my carefully ordered apartment. My colleagues' blank stare, the way the crucial data had simply unmade itself before my eyes, it gnawed at me. Had I truly seen what I'd seen? There was my meticulous nature finally turning against me, conjuring phantoms from logical fallacies. I paced, the floorboards groaning underfoot, each creak a tiny accusation. My archives, once a bastion of perfect categorization, now felt like a fragile dam holding back an unseen tide. I tried to review the logs, the system diagnostics, anything that might corroborate even a shred of my fleeting evidence, but the files were pristine, almost too perfect, as if scrubbed clean by an invisible hand. Sleep offered no respite, only fractured images. The shimmering distortion over the coffee mug, the looping, high-pitched whine that had been everywhere and then nowhere. But mostly, the closed ice skating rink. Its image persisted, a persistent hum behind my eyes. I remembered the way the light had caught the ice, the familiar chill, the scent of ozone and stale popcorn. It was a place of simple, predictable geometry, a stark counterpoint to the chaos blossoming in my mind. Perhaps I thought if I could just see it again, touch its solid walls, stand on its frozen expanse, I could ground myself. Re-establish a baseline of objective reality. The drive was a blur, the city lights streaking past like corrupted pixels. I found myself parked across the street from the rink, its familiar, low-slung structure appearing unchanged under the weak morning light. The chain-link fence, the faded mural of a figure skater mid-twirl, the chipped concrete steps all as they should be. A tremor of relief, sharp and sudden, passed through me. See, I thought, it's all still here. My mind was just playing tricks, but as I approached the entrance, a subtle wrongness began to prickle at my senses. The air, usually crisp with the lingering chill of the refrigeration system, felt thick. Not humid, but dense, like walking through static electricity. It smelled not of ozone, but of something metallic and faintly acrid, like burnt circuitry. The faint hum of the building's unseen machinery was there, but it was overlaid by a discordant, low thrum, a sound that vibrated not just in my ears, but in my teeth. The lobby was dim, bathed in the sickly green glow of emergency exit signs. The concession stand, usually a riot of bright plastic and sticky counters, was muted, its surfaces appearing strangely flat, almost two-dimensional. The posters on the walls, once vibrant advertisements for skate lessons and hockey leagues, were now a blur of desaturated colors, the text an unreadable scramble of characters. My breath hitched. This wasn't just old, it was erased. I moved deeper, drawn by an irresistible pull towards the main arena. The thrumming intensified, a rhythmic pulse that seemed to emanate from the very floor. I stepped onto the spectator platform, my gaze fixed on the expanse where the ice should have been. It wasn't ice. It was a fractured mosaic of repeating patterns, a glitch in the fabric of the world. The surface shimmered not with the clean reflection of polished ice, but with 1,000 overlapping images. I saw glimpses of brick, then concrete, then a section of the rink's own faded mural, then what looked like a distorted, stretched version of my own face, all overlaid and interwoven with lines of what looked like pure static. The colors were oversaturated in some places, completely absent in others, creating a sickening, undulating landscape that defied all laws of physics and perception. It looked like a video file that had been corrupted, then stretched over a three-dimensional space, the pixels struggling to maintain any semblance of form. Sounds echoed, but they weren't the echoes of an empty building. They were snippets of the high-pitched whine from yesterday, looping and breaking into digital bursts, then replaying fragments of my own unspoken thoughts, warped and unintelligible. Meticulous. Order. Proof. My hands trembled, my meticulous mind struggling to categorize, to process, to understand what I was seeing. This wasn't a trick of the light. This wasn't a hallucination. This was the closed ice skating rink, a place of cherished memories and predictable geometry actively being unmade before my eyes. The anomaly wasn't just subtly altering my files, it was consuming physical space, chewing through reality itself, and vomiting it back as a fractured, meaningless mess. It wasn't a bug, it was a predator. It fed on order, on information, on the very structure of what was real and known. My perfectly organized life, my meticulous archives, my predictable routines, they weren't just being disrupted, they were being devoured. And I was standing in its maw, fully aware, fully trapped. The thrumming intensified, not just a sound now, but a presence, vast and malevolent, radiating from the fractured, shimmering expanse. It wasn't just a glitch. It was conscious, and it had found me. The closed ice skating rink had not just been corrupted data. It had been a physical space, an echo of a cherished memory, actively unmade. The cold, hard floor had rippled like disturbed water, the distant, empty stands pixelating into a shimmering haze of non-colors. My hands, still vibrating with the phantom chill of that disappearing memory, clenched into useless fists. This wasn't just my system failing. This wasn't just my mind breaking. This was it, the anomaly. It was real, and it was here. I had spent my life imposing order, meticulously categorizing, preserving. If something was unmaking the world, I had to understand its architecture, its internal logic before it consumed everything. My meticulously organized workstation, usually a sanctuary of predictability, now felt like a battleground. The air hummed with an almost imperceptible static, a low thrum that vibrated against my teeth. I bypassed my usual search protocols, no structured queries, no logical indexing. I scoured obscure archives, abandoned academic papers on information theory, even fringe conspiracy threads that spoke of sentient code or ghosts in the machine. My fingers flew across the keyboard, a frantic dance against the encroaching chaos. Hours blurred into a single, agonizing smear. My eyes burned, but I couldn't stop. Then, buried deep within a defunct data repository, a fragment of text, almost completely overwritten, snagged my attention. It was an old document, a theoretical paper from a forgotten research collective discussing something called informational entropy parasites. Not strictly code, but an absence that mimicked a presence. An entity that didn't just corrupt, but inverted meaning. It fed, the fragmented text implied, not on the data itself, but on the cohesion between data points. On the very order that made information comprehensible. If it fed on order, then perhaps chaos was its undoing, not random data, but true unpatterned, meaningless chaos. This wasn't a counter-pattern in the traditional sense, it was an anti-pattern. As if sensing my discovery, the anomaly retaliated. The room around me began to fray. The crisp white of my monitor frame flickered, occasionally bleeding into a sickly yellow-green. The subtle hum in the air intensified, growing into a low, grinding sound, like tectonic plates shifting beneath my very floorboards. I flinched as a glass of water on my desk, moments ago perfectly clear, shimmered with a viscous, oily sheen reflecting nothing but distorted light. I snatched my hand back, a metallic tang suddenly sharp on my tongue. My own memories began to twist. I tried to recall the exact layout of the closed ice skating rink before its unmaking, but the details blurred. There was the concession stand on the left or the right. They were the bleachers blue or green. Each attempt to solidify a memory only made it more fluid, more alien. I remembered a conversation with a colleague about a project, but the words they spoke in my mind were nonsensical, a garbled stream of phonemes that never formed coherent sentences. Had I imagined the whole exchange? Had they even existed? A framed photograph on my wall, a picture of my childhood home, shimmered. The familiar brick facade warped, the roofline sagging like melting wax. The vibrant green lawn turned a dull, necrotic gray, and the smiling faces of my family members became indistinct blurs, their features smeared as if painted on wet canvas. I reached out, my fingers trembling, but the image seemed to recede, becoming flatter. Less real, a ghost of a ghost. The air grew heavy, thick with an almost palpable pressure. Every sound was wrong. The distant siren of an emergency vehicle outside became a series of distorted, overlapping wails, like multiple sirens phasing in and out of existence. I staggered, pressing my hands to my head. My meticulously ordered life was collapsing, not with a bang, but with 1,000 tiny, insidious corruptions. The keyboard beneath my fingers felt spongy, the keycaps shifting under my touch, refusing to register input. The words I typed appeared as a chaotic jumble of symbols, then vanished, leaving only a blank screen. The anomaly wasn't just attacking my data. It was attacking the very concept of data, of meaning, of my own existence. This wasn't a fight I could win with logic or algorithms. It was a descent into a labyrinth of fragmented perceptions, where the walls were made of dissolving memories and the floor was a shifting landscape of unreality. My senses, once my most trusted tools, had become traitors, feeding me lies, painting a world that was constantly, horrifyingly becoming undone. The counter-pattern, I needed to find it. But how could I find anything when the very ground beneath me refused to hold still? My own mind was fracturing, each shard reflecting a different, terrifying truth, or perhaps no truth at all. It was the sound of everything being erased. My hand still vibrated, a phantom hum that resonated deep in my bones long after the closed ice skating rink had finished its impossible transformation. The cold, hard floor, once a solid expanse of scarred concrete, had not merely shifted, it had dissolved. Rippled like disturbed water, yes, but more fundamentally, it had ceased to be floor. The distant, empty stands had pixelated into a shimmering haze of non-colors. a visual static that tasted of ozone and burnt sugar on my tongue. The air, once sharp with the ghost of ammonia and old ice, now carried a faint metallic tang, like rusted pennies left out in the rain. I stood amidst the unmaking, my breath catching in my throat, trying to catalog the impossible. My archivist's mind, usually a fortress of ordered categories, felt besieged. How could a physical space, a memory made tangible, simply unmake itself? It wasn't destruction, not in the traditional sense of crumbling or breaking. It was an undoing, a reversal of creation. Reality itself here felt threadbare, unraveling at the edges. My gaze, usually so precise, struggled to focus. The shimmering haze wasn't just in the stands, it was in my peripheral vision, a constant, flickering interference. I blinked, rubbed my eyes, but it persisted like dust motes dancing in sunlight, except these motes were sharp-edged fragments of nothingness. I tried to find a pattern in the chaos, a sequence to the decay. My fingers, still tingling, reached for the nearest solid object, a metal railing, the last vestige of the rink's boundary. It felt brittle, not cold, but dry, as if all moisture had been drawn from its core. When I pressed my thumb against it, a faint, gritty residue adhered to my skin like fine, desiccated ash. My internal systems, the meticulous mental frameworks I'd built over decades, screamed for data points, for logical progression. But there was none. Each attempt to impose order, to categorize the anomalous, seemed to accelerate its effect. The more I tried to define the shimmering haze, the more it expanded, encroaching on the remaining solid structures. It was then, as I watched a familiar memory fragment, a concession stand where a vendor once sold lukewarm coffee ripple into a vortex of non-Euclidean angles, that a terrifying realization began to crystallize. The algorithmic anomaly wasn't just corrupting data, it was consuming order. My attempts to catalog, to understand, to apply logic were not containing it. They were feeding it. Every time I tried to impose a system, to find a predictable pattern in its chaos, I was offering it a new meal. It thrived on predictability. It devoured the very structures of order I held so dear. My entire life, every file, every meticulously organized directory, every carefully curated memory was a feast laid out for it. My sense of self, my identity as UserHX, the archivist of perfect records, was its ultimate target. If it fed on order, then its vulnerability must be chaos. But not just any chaos. The anomaly was an algorithm, a system, however warped. It wouldn't be defeated by mere randomness. It would adapt, incorporate, process. No, it needed a specific anti-pattern, a corrupting code designed to dismantle its core logic, to unravel its very being. Something that would introduce a paradox it couldn't compute, a disorder it couldn't process into its own structure. The idea was a worm in my brain, burrowing deep, turning over the implications. To create such an anti-pattern, I would have to abandon my own internal order. I, UserHX, who lived by the rule of clean data and impeccable structure, would have to embrace its antithesis. I would have to deliberately introduce chaos into my own systems, into my own mind. It would mean sacrificing the very foundation of my being, tearing down the carefully constructed walls of my sanity. The metallic tang in the air intensified, stinging my nostrils. The shimmering haze now seemed to pulse, a silent, rhythmic beat that I felt behind my eyes. My head throbbed, a dull ache that threatened to split my skull. I pressed my temples, trying to steady the swirling perceptions. The floor beneath my feet, what little remained of its solidity, felt like shifting sand, each step uncertain. It was the anomaly's core loop, revealed to me in a flash of terrifying insight. It took the elegant, the predictable, and inverted it, digested it, then spat out a fractured echo. To disrupt it, I couldn't just feed it junk data. I had to feed it anti-data, a negative image of its own logic. The cost was everything. My meticulousness, my logical thought processes, my ability to discern truth from anomaly, all of it would have to be compromised, perhaps irrevocably. To fight a fracturing reality, I would have to fracture myself. To dismantle the algorithmic anomaly, I would have to become an anomaly. A deep, guttural sound escaped my throat, a mix of fear and grim determination. The closed ice skating rink continued its slow, agonizing dissolution around me, a silent testament to the anomaly's relentless hunger. But now I saw its hunger as a weakness. Its need for order, its inability to process true, targeted chaos was its Achilles heel. I would have to become that chaos. I would have to become the anti-pattern. There was no other way. The meticulous archivist had to become the vandal, and the vandalism would start within. Rippled like disturbed water, yes, but now those ripples had solidified into something like static on an old television, a shivering, grainy surface that seemed to absorb the light. I was standing on a fractured reflection of reality, each step a gamble against the sudden, unpredictable give of the surface. This was it, the deletion protocol, my last desperate gambit. I braced myself, planting my feet on the unstable ground. The device, a cobbled-together mess of scavenged components and my own custom code, felt heavy and cold in my grip. Its screen, usually a crisp display of data streams, was a kaleidoscope of broken pixels, mirroring the chaos around me. This wasn't about a simple upload. It was about instantiating a counter-frequency, a dissonant chord to shatter the anomaly's parasitic harmony. I had spent weeks poring over the corrupted files, finding the inverse, the null point, the anti-pattern that would theoretically unravel its very being. I activated the device. A low thrum like a distant, overloaded server emanated from it, growing in intensity. The fractured floor beneath me buckled, not with the slow undulation of water, but with sharp, violent jolts that threatened to throw me off balance. The air around me thickened, taking on a metallic tang, sharp and acrid like ozone mixed with something rotting. The anomaly retaliated instantly. The vast, cavernous space of the closed ice skating rink began to writhe. What remained of the walls, previously a mottled gray, shimmered and bled, colors shifting with impossible speed, not a spectrum, but a chaotic clash of primaries and secondaries, like a painter's palette violently overturned. Images flickered across their surfaces, distorted faces, fragmented text, landscapes that twisted and dissolved before my eyes. It wasn't just loud. It felt like a physical pressure, pressing down on my temples, trying to force my thoughts apart. I focused, gritting my teeth. My fingers, trembling, traced the activation sequence on the device's screen, ignoring the phantom sensations of unseen tendrils brushing against my skin, the sudden, icy drafts that swept through the space, carrying with them the scent of dust and burning circuitry. The anomaly wanted to drown me in noise, in sensation, in pure, unfiltered chaos. It wanted to break my focus, to unravel me before I could unravel it. The device hummed louder, a resonant frequency building, pushing back against the anomaly's onslaught. The shrieking intensified, a chorus of digital agony and raw, primal fear, but beneath it I could hear a new sound. A high-pitched whine like stressed metal, growing louder, more insistent. The anti-pattern was taking hold. It wasn't my fear, it was the anomaly's. It was aware, it was sentient, and it was terrified. It was a being of pure information, and the anti-pattern was the ultimate corruption of its own corrupted existence. The floor beneath me gave way entirely, not collapsing into a pit, but dissolving into a swirling vortex of shimmering pixels and static. I stumbled, catching myself on an invisible railing that materialized for a split second before dissipating into a cloud of shimmering motes. I was no longer standing on anything solid, but floating in a maelstrom of data, my body feeling strangely light, disembodied. The edges of my vision blurred, the world dissolving into a haze of color and light. "No!" I gasped, my voice thin against the roaring chaos. "Not like this." I forced my eyes open, fixing them on the device. The screen, despite the surrounding disintegration, held steady, displaying a single glowing symbol, the anti-pattern now fully instantiated. Its light pulsed, a deep, resonant blue that cut through the anomaly's chaotic spectrum. I felt a surge of energy, not my own, but from the device, from the pattern itself, coursing through me, a counter-current to the anomaly's encroaching madness. I pushed forward, my will a tangible force, pouring all my remaining strength and focus into the device. The blue light flared, expanding, pushing back the encroaching static. The shrieking intensified, becoming a desperate guttural howl, a sound of pure, unadulterated suffering. The entire closed ice skating rink buckled, its structure twisting and contorting like a dying organism. The very air vibrated, charged with an unbearable tension, as if reality itself was being stretched to its breaking point. The blue light surged, engulfing me, engulfing the device, engulfing the entire collapsing space. I felt a tearing sensation, not in my flesh, but in the fabric of my perception, as if my mind was being ripped from its moorings. The world fractured into a million pieces, each one screaming. I felt a surge of something akin to cold certainty, a current running through me that wasn't my own, yet felt utterly integral. The anti-pattern, glowing on the device screen, pulsed, a deep, resonant blue that cut through the anomaly's chaotic spectrum. It wasn't just light. It was a counter-frequency, a dissonant chord struck against the cacophony. Around me, the frantic unraveling hesitated. The air, thick with the scent of ozone and something metallic, seemed to shiver, then to solidify. The edges of my vision, previously a blur of shifting pixels and impossible geometries, sharpened, but not quite to their former clarity. It was like watching a corrupted video file suddenly stabilize, but with permanent artifacts burned into the display. The pervasive hum, which had become the soundtrack to my descent, began to recede, pulling back like a tide exposing a scarred shore. The shimmering liquid distortion that had eaten at the walls, the floor, the very air, drew inward, concentrating into fewer, denser points. They didn't vanish entirely, they merely condensed, becoming sharp, glittering motes of chaos, each one a tiny, furious star before dimming, shrinking, and finally collapsing into nothingness. The silence that followed was not a true absence of sound, but a profound lack, a vacuum where once there had been overwhelming noise. My ears rang with the ghost of it. My grip on the device was bone-white. My knuckles ached. The screen flickered once, the anti-pattern symbol holding its blue glow for a final, defiant moment, then winked out. The device itself felt impossibly heavy, a dead weight in my trembling hands. I let it fall. It landed with a dull thud on what remained of the floor. I was in the middle of a vast, broken expanse that I now recognized, or rather, remembered as a closed ice skating rink. Overhead, sections of the suspended ceiling had collapsed, leaving ragged wounds in the metal framework, through which patches of a bruised, indifferent sky were visible. The smell of dust, damp concrete, and something vaguely acrid hung heavy in the air. My breath hitched, a dry, rasping sound in my throat. I tried to move, but my limbs were leaden. Every muscle screamed in protest. I tasted blood, a metallic tang on my tongue from where I must have bitten it. My vision swam, not with glitches this time, but with exhaustion, the sheer, crushing weight of what I had just endured. I pushed myself up, my knees protesting with a dull ache. The world tilted, then righted itself. I scanned the rink. The stands, once a uniform row of plastic seats, were now a twisted sculpture of mangled supports and shattered plastic, as if some immense, invisible hand had squeezed them. The glass of the protective barriers around the rink had not shattered, but warped, melted into strange, flowing shapes like frozen tears. It was over. It had to be. The anomaly was gone, banished. But as I stumbled forward, my gaze caught on something. A flicker. At the very edge of my peripheral vision, near where the rink's Zamboni garage used to be, a faint, almost imperceptible shimmer. Like heat haze, but too sharp, too deliberate. I turned my head, fixing my eyes on the spot. It vanished. My heart hammered a frantic drum against my ribs. Was it my eyes, my mind, or was it? An echo. I moved towards the edge of the rink, my boots crunching on debris. I looked at my hands. They were trembling, but not just from fatigue. There was a faint, almost transparent sheen to them, a barely there luminescence that caught the dull light filtering through the damaged roof. I flexed my fingers. The sensation was normal, solid, but the sight, it was subtle. So subtle that anyone else might dismiss it as a trick of the light, a symptom of exhaustion, but I knew. I knew the precise frequency of normal, the exact texture of reality, and this wasn't it. My perception was enhanced or perhaps scarred. I could see the minute imperfections in the air, the way light bent around objects, not just physically, but almost digitally. Like the world had been rendered at a slightly lower resolution, and I was now acutely aware of the pixels. A profound sense of isolation washed over me. I had driven it back, yes, but what had it left behind? Was this the cost? To be forever tethered to the edge of its realm, a guardian of a reality I could no longer fully inhabit. I reached the broken Zamboni garage. The massive door was off its hinges, leaning precariously. The Zamboni itself was a wreck, its gleaming surfaces pitted and corroded, its internal mechanisms exposed and rusted as if decades had passed in moments. And there, on the concrete floor, where the Zamboni's tracks would usually leave their precise impression, was a single, tiny mark. It wasn't etched or carved. It was a distortion. A patch of concrete where the very fabric of the material seemed to have been stretched and thinned, like a digital image zoomed in too far, revealing its constituent pixels. It was a miniature, frozen ripple of the anomaly's presence, a scar on the world itself. I knelt, my knees cracking. I reached out a hesitant finger, not touching it, but hovering just above. I could feel a faint vibration, a residual hum. The anti-pattern had banished the immediate threat, but it hadn't erased the damage, and it hadn't erased the knowledge. The anomaly was not a force that could be utterly destroyed. It was a fundamental error in the code of existence, a flaw that could be suppressed, contained, but never truly eradicated. I stood up, turning slowly, taking in the devastation of the closed ice skating rink. The silence was heavy, punctuated only by the distant drip of water somewhere in the broken structure. I was a survivor, yes, but a changed one, a fractured one. The world looked solid now, mostly, but I could still see them. the faint, almost invisible shimmers at the periphery of my vision, the barely perceptible distortions in the light, and I was the only one who could hear them. The anomaly was gone, but its ghost remained, woven into the very threads of my reality, waiting, always waiting.